The whole purpose of this activity is to facilitate conversations that matter. So it's built off of this principle, the World Style Cafe. There are actually 7 principles behind this. The first is to see the context. So what are we trying to understand? We're trying to also create a space where those conversations can happen. So create a hospitable space. Explore questions that matter. So we're giving you a set of questions to discuss, providing this structure. We really want to encourage everyone's contributions. So it's not just a few people at the table taking over the discussion, but everyone will have the chance to engage and to contribute. We do want to connect a range of perspectives. We know, right, that we have people coming from the computational side, data science side, and also from the biomaterials experimental side, but also even within biomaterials, right, it's not a monolith. So there are people who are using different approaches, different applications, different biological questions as well. And then we want to be sure to listen collectively for insights that come out of these conversations. And then at the end, we will share what we've learned or discovered through those conversations. So we do have some structure here, and that is given to you by the QR code. So what I've done is to, along with Belinda and Meta, we've distributed everyone across different institutions and career stages. So you hopefully are at a table where you might not know anyone, and that's okay. Because we want to have this discussion, we want to have some infusion of different perspectives. So we have some structure here, and we are going to keep time to make sure that we stay on time and that we can be efficient and respectful of the time. The first part of it is just a short 5-minute conversation with one other person at the table. And so we're going to break out into pairs at your table, have a brief discussion, and answer these 2 questions. The first is, what are the grand challenges in biomaterials research? And what questions can be answered with a computational or modeling thought partner? So we're really trying to help you understand, let's partner alongside with the computational person and just discuss those 2 questions. And then 2 pairs will come together, or maybe 3 pairs if the table is all full. 2 pairs will come together, and I would like for you all to select a note keeper of those 2 pairs. So it might be a group of 4 and a group of 6. So select a note taker, use the QR code that's on your table, and you can add the notes in under the blue tab. And here, you're going to summarize what you've already learned from the pairs, and then also add on another question, and that is, what are the real and perceived barriers to engaging with a computational modeler thought partner? Okay? And then the whole table will come together. Again, select a note taker so that we can keep track of what's being discussed and follow up and synthesize what's come up in those conversations. So starting in the pair, right, everyone has the chance to contribute. Everyone has the chance to think about what are those grand challenges, and then we bring them together in a thoughtful and structured way. What questions do you have? You're ready to go after it. Okay, just make sure when we do switch to the second part that you are having someone keep notes so that we can follow up afterwards. Meta.
This is fast-paced. Are you going to guide us through?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
So for now, break into pairs, and I will give you a 5-minute timer. Okay?
Project my lab is working on.
The difficulty in stopping the conversations means that this is being successful. So you're having great conversations, very exciting. What I would like for you to do now is to group together. So if there are multiple pairs at the table, maybe 2 pairs can come together to form a group of 4. Or if there aren't that many, then it can go ahead and you can discuss as a table. But we want to now come together and ask, in addition to summarizing the first 2 questions, what you learned and what you came up with, also add this new question, which is, what are the real and perceived barriers to engaging with computational modeling thought partner? And maybe you've already noticed that we have tried to distribute a computational thought partner already at the table, but we're a little bit far and few in between. So it's almost like finding a golden nugget. Okay, so maybe you've already identified who that person is at the table. If not, it might come up in the next conversation or the third conversation. So please take notes. Again, you can use the QR code. It's shareable, it's editable. We just need one person from each of the groups to take notes so that we can synthesize after the fact and see what kinds of information or resources can the computational core provide. Okay, so break into groups of 4 or 6 or even a whole table depending on the size, and you will have 15 minutes to go through the next session.
without an end word, or we have, an act of a response, a desirable response. So is there, you're interested in designing it based on that. So I kind of model again, but you do need to understand what's
making the material cell instructive and letting the cells sort of instruct their environment.
So what we'd like to do in this last part is to come together as a whole table, synthesize what came up in the discussions, so what emerging themes arose, and keep track of the notes. Again, have a note taker on the orange slide. And maybe we don't need the full 15 minutes for this. I'll see how the conversations are going. But let's at least have 5 to 10 minutes for this last piece so that we can synthesize what's happening. And then maybe even see if there are any questions that you guys have. You can add those to the notes. And at the very end, we'll have a time to report out to sort of hear what's been discussed and see what themes came up. Okay, so we'll start a 10-minute timer, but we might shorten it depending on how the conversations are going. Okay.
Some physical models, but right now it's more of just like making things in our simulations and doing fluid.
Material interacting with exterior, not modeling.
Frictions and those bonds that affect the degradation of the
So let's come back together as a whole group. Maybe we'll just spend a few minutes if we can hear 1 or 2 themes that came up from the tables. Of course, Meta and Belinda and I will go through and read all of the notes. We see that some tables are phenomenal at taking notes and others are working on it. We won't call you out, but I know who you are. I know who you are. So, who wants to just give 1 or 2 themes that came up in the discussion? Don't make me call on you.
Natasha wants to do it.
Please. Please, go ahead, Natasha.
So some of the challenges that we talked about is, from a biomaterials research standpoint, is there are a lot of parameters to change in terms of like experiments and also thinking about scale-up approaches. And we talked about like the difference between in vitro experiments versus in vivo experiments. And then in terms of the barriers, a lot of us said speaking the same language, so making sure that a computational person is able to communicate what they're doing and a biomaterials person is able to communicate what we're doing in the same sense of understanding. And then also we talked about public data sharing in terms of like experiments from a biomaterials perspective, but also like computationally, we're thinking about like with Mete and then the genomics field, how things are just easily available online, and you can just ask different questions, versus from a biomaterial standpoint, that type of environment is not really there.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And we brought up a lot of the same themes as this table. We talk about communication a lot and how I feel like we don't have a computational person at this table, right? But we've worked with them in the past and think about how communication is so important. It has to be early. So someone at this table that maybe works in cancer bioengineering will gather a bunch of data, take them to their modeling friend, and they're like, no, all this data is not, I can't work with this, right? And so onboarding a collaborator early during experimental design is so critical.
For sure.
And then the other side to that is someone else at the table that is working more in vivo experiments, is bringing on the computational model earlier. And they're saying, great, okay, so we can change all these variables, so we're going to need 1,000 mice. No, that's not possible. And so kind of bridging that gap between like, well, how much data do you really need for first principles versus what's possible with my time and funding.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point, right? We don't want to try to retrofit a model just to, work with the data set. And similarly, right, we don't want to totally scrap a data set just to have this model. So it has to be communication and partnership early on. I think Belinda hit on that as well. Who else? Leo?
Yes, we touched on those exact points. Additionally, I guess one aspect that sort of fits into that is the educational component. So how do we train either the experimentalists or computationalists or the trainees who might be interested in both, so that they have the tools to be able to design experiments and build models from the ground up, which we think is really critical because, as you mentioned, thank you. Trying to retrofit a model in data is really challenging. The other point that we mentioned, so we have two computational folks, I believe. Us two? Okay. So yeah, that was my bad. I just joined randomly last. But we also learned that managing the time for those of us that do both experiments and computational work is challenging. You have to shift your mind from being in the lab to building the models. And so I would usually do it maybe weeks at a time, most of the time months. Like I would do a month worth of data and then switch back to computational things. So yeah, those are some of the challenges that we discussed. Did I miss anything?
I'll just add, so it sounds like a lot of the tables are having the same conversation. I'll just add, we also didn't have a computational person here. But one of the things that we thought was hard is how do you make sure, and you used the word partnership, which I wanted to highlight. How do you make sure that it is a partnership, not as an experimentalist being like, help me, but I want it to be useful and mutually beneficial. So I think that also comes into play. You don't want to bring somebody in and then have them just do what you're interested in. It needs to be something that both people are. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It sounds like everyone kind of covered a lot of the problems that we had talked about at our table. The one thing that I thought was really interesting that we noticed is just how complementary the two approaches are. So just when setting out to use a computational method and to collaborate, just making sure that everyone kind of understands how you can maximize that. Because a lot of the strengths of experimental methods are going to cover a lot of your weaknesses computationally and vice versa. So being smart about how you design your system and the things that you're actually going to look at can really help with your bang for your buck there.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, right? Like we can have the combination of the two to push the discoveries and the impact forward. Thank you. Ashley?
A point I appreciated at our table was sort of the observation that computational is not a monolith, that there's, even in the few of us that spoke today, different methodologies and different approaches, and that you could have more than one computational partner, and that also experiments, that you each, that all the experimentalists in this room do different kinds of techniques, not just different materials, but whether you're doing cell culture studies or you're focusing on drug delivery questions or other kinds of assays or measurements or techniques you do, that it's not a monolith. So that you might have experimental collaborators if you're experimentalist, right? You see different expertise, your different interests that you're trying to go, and that the alignment, we had echo the question of the sentiment of aligning your interests and being able to answer biological questions based on these different skills you bring can be quite powerful.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like the conversations were very fruitful. Maybe I'll just end with a couple of comments. So I didn't want to start out like saying what the goals for this session were so that we could see how things happened organically and how those conversations evolved. But really overall what the computational, the modeling and simulation core wanted to address today is first just so that you would learn and hear about examples where models have been used in biology. And I think Ravi's talk was excellent for that. We had then the goal of just sparking some inspiration about the use of models in biomaterials, and Ashley gave us some great examples that we can maybe, push forward or extrapolate on to see how it might be used in your own work. And then also, I think Belinda was fantastic in seeing, well, how might we break down those initial activation energy barriers to get into a partnership with a computational modeler and computational thinker. And then hopefully this conversation was allowing you to brainstorm places where the modeling could be useful and say, well, what kind of resources, what kind of communication or training or partnerships might we be able to foster in order to make that goal a reality. And so we really hope that this is just the start of the conversation, right? It's just 1 hour really that we spent on this, but it will spark new ideas and help us move forward. And also, right, you might even be even more ready to apply for those opportunity funds through the hub, through these conversations that have been had today. This will also help Meta and Belinda and I think about where can we provide more support and resources from the core. So I just want to thank all of you for being open and vulnerable and asking the questions and answering the questions and keeping notes better than some. And we really appreciate your time. I think this is a good place to close the conversation.